Mr. Holland, members of the board, Dr. Casey. Happy to be here this afternoon to go over a few items that are on your evening agenda. So here they are in list form, and I'll go over them in this particular order, with the first being the award of a construction contract for the Courthouse Road Trail Project and appropriation of a small amount of additional funds. This actually would have been a good segue or follow-up to Nate, the park manager's presentation, because it's a very similar project with the ultimate end goal of tying into Pocahontas State Park. So on the screen there, you'll see a planned shared use trail, so a typical asphalt trail. It's about a mile long, and it extends along the county complex on Courthouse Road to the fairgrounds, and then through the school property on Salem Church, actually to Salem Church Road. This provides a lot of synergy for multiple uses, the fairgrounds, the multiple schools along Courthouse Road, the proposed Courthouse Landing development, and we hope ultimately Pocahontas State Park as you travel north and across Route 10. It's just over $875,000. All of which is smart scale funding except for $50,000, which the county had to chip in just to make up a little bit of a shortfall when we ultimately ended up advertising the project. So a nice project, a good addition to the area. So next on your agenda, at least in the list there, you'll see a request to set a public hearing for next month to discuss what are called TAP projects, which are Transportation Alternatives Projects. If you may be asking, well, what is that exactly? A couple of examples of completed projects. So on the left there, you'll see sidewalk at Smoke Tree. On the right, again, sidewalk at Manchester High School. TAP projects are generally relatively small, $1 million or less. It is a federally funded program. So again, you work in Davis-Bacon, federal wage rates, things like that, and it becomes more and more difficult to stretch that money. So just to give you an example of what we've done in the past, in the agenda item, we do list the projects that we recommend holding the public hearing on and moving forward for application. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these, but again, if you have specific questions, happy to follow up in the intervening month between now and the public hearing. Some simple pedestrian crossing and sidewalk improvements at Hull Street and Courthouse Road. Again, similar, Hull Street and Turner Road, another area we do have a fair amount of pedestrian activity, which would benefit from some basic pedestrian improvements, sidewalks, the flashing walk, don't walk signs, pedestrian push buttons, those sorts of things. This is the one that ties into what I spoke about earlier, Courthouse Road shared use path from Route 10, really getting towards Pocahontas. Again, try to take advantage of the myriad facilities there at the park, and to get you to the bike trails. Again, a couple of, and I'll touch on these at the end of the presentation, again, requesting permission to look for funding for what's called the Fall Line Trail, and I'll touch on that in detail. But again, the first project on the left is right there at Route 10, and the next one is down towards the Ettrick area. Also on your agenda item is a public hearing for the Secretary Road Improvement Budget. There's a lot of information to that particular agenda item. Really the crux of it amounts to what you're doing is budgeting just barely, slightly over $1 million. So it's not a huge sum of money, the majority of which we are actually bankrolling into a contingency fund. Currently within the Transportation Department, there's hundreds of millions of dollars in projects. So having, adding another $700,000 in contingency funds to revenue sharing projects is very helpful in case there are small overages. You don't have to then seek additional funding. But it can also be used, again, as you see outlined there, for doing things like pedestrian tunnels, paving gravel or dirt roads, those sorts of things. So not a huge funding source by any stretch, but one that the board does need to allocate every year. And I think Brett and his group have sat down and talked through that in detail. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to let us know. So the Fall Line Trail. So this is something that you've probably heard a little bit about recently, and I mentioned a couple of slides ago. It's a 43-mile proposed north-south regional trail, 16 miles is in Chester Hill County. That's the largest portion of any of the localities. Previously, this was the Ashland to Petersburg Trail. It's now got some branding to it, as you can see it. It's really been a push from sports backers and Bike Walk RVA. They've done a wonderful job of providing some insight and guidance as to how this occurs. If you're kind of going, well, what is this really going to look like? It's basically the north-south version of the Capitol Trail. So that's what it would be in terms of both scope and impact to the community. There is a website now. It's fall, and there are 3 L's. I had to double check that. einva.org. So if you want to go there, you can see a lot of different information about the trail. There's also an interactive web map, so you can click, zoom, and it will tell you where the trail is routed through all of the jurisdictions, and you can see the portion there. In Chesterfield, it generally runs along Route 1 to Chester Road, and then south through the old abandoned rail line until you get to Petersburg and the Appomattox. Again, this is a little internal map that has been put together by the nice folks over at Bike Walk RVA and Sports Backers. I don't know if you can see the column on the left, but that actually shows the planned and funded projects. And if you look, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 along Route 1. So those are projects that the county has already obtained funding for, really focused up towards the Route 1 corridor near the food line and Chippenham, and trying to provide some pedestrian amenities there. Also happens to be that that's the same route as the Fall Line Trail, so we're looking forward to executing those projects as the initial stages of that particular project. In terms of how do we execute the other, I'll say 13 miles of trail, that's really to be determined. I think from here out, we need to determine, what are the local, state, and federal roles, who funds what, and perhaps, Mr. Carroll, is the role of the CVTA in funding any of that. So I think more to be discussed on that in the future, but it is an important part, I think, of the regional trail network. Speaking of trails networks, this is a map of the Bikeways and Trails Plan, and it doesn't seem that long ago, but the board adopted this in November of 2015. So it has been 6 years since you all really took a hard look at this. Staff's going to take a hard look at this again. We're going to, at least make a few minor tweaks. Number one, we're going to make sure that the Fall Line Trail is appropriately captured on here because it's a very important part of the network. Number two, we're going to look to really try to activate Pocahontas State Park more, put more of an emphasis on providing access to that particular gem in the center of the county. And then we're going to look at possibly revising, this network of trails. There's a lot of stuff on here. Over the past 6 years, I think we've realized that maybe we need to provide a little more nimble focus and focus on some of these more regional trails. So again, more to come on that, but we will certainly bring that to the commission and the board for their consideration and probably hold a couple of work sessions on what that'll look like moving forward. And lastly, in conjunction with that, through the pandemic, I think we've also realized that we really do need to look at more bicycle and pedestrian amenities throughout the county. We'll also likely be coming back with some sidewalk planning, so to really try to focus on where do we need sidewalks, where we're getting sidewalk requests. The board has thankfully put a nice pot of money out there for community kit activity. Start talking about some of those sorts of projects that really make a difference in the everyday lives of neighbors and residents of the county to connect to schools and libraries and other public facilities. So with that, that's the completion of the formal presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. Questions, comments?
Brief comment, Mr. Chairman. I think it's exciting to see all the transportation infrastructure happening in Chesterfield in one stage or another. I was just commenting to my colleague, Mr. Engel, it's so good just in 5 years to see the changes up and down Route 1. And I'm excited about the pedestrian improvements around Rockwood and some of our neighborhoods. I mean, really, and the department, your department and the transportation department has done an excellent job of, I think, getting out there, meeting with the community, and letting them know what's coming down the pike. And there's a lot of good things on deck for us in the next couple of years, and I'm just excited to see it come to life.